Welcome to the Procurement 101 training module presented by the Maine Department of Education Child Nutrition Program. This presentation will cover the basics of procurement in school nutrition programs. Procurement is the process you go through to obtain goods or services at the best possible price. The process includes clearly identifying what it is you want and writing specifications for it, soliciting or seeking out bids or proposals for the item you want to purchase, looking at and evaluating the responses you received from vendors, awarding the contract, which means making the purchase, and finally, managing the contract to make sure you are getting what it is you agreed on. Some other terms that we'll be using throughout this training: solicitation. This is a document that contains clear and accurate descriptions of what it is you are looking for and all requirements. And specification. This is a concise statement or description of the item you are looking for. For example, a US number 125 to 138 count apple, any variety. There are 4 key principles to conducting procurement. These include the Buy American provision, complying with federal, state, and local regulations and requirements, ensuring full and open competition, and awarding the contract to vendors who are responsive and responsible. We are going to go through what we mean by each of these. The first principle of procurement that school nutrition programs must comply with is the Buy American provision. The Buy American provision, as defined in the National School Lunch Act, requires schools to purchase, to the maximum extent practicable, domestic commodities and products. A domestic commodity or product means an agricultural commodity that is processed in the United States and/or a food product that is processed in the United States substantially using agricultural commodities produced in the United States. This provision must be included on all procurement documents such as specifications, the solicitation, and the final contract. The second key principle to procurement is to comply with federal and local requirements. The slide shows the federal regulations for procurement. It is important to note that 2 CFR 200 applies to all programs receiving federal funds, not just school nutrition programs. The 7 CFR regulations are specific to each school nutrition program: the National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast Program, Summer Food Service Program, and the Special Milk Program. Keep in mind, your local requirements may be more restrictive than federal regulations, but they cannot be less restrictive. The third principle to procurement is achieving full and open competition. This is when all possible vendors are on a level playing field and can submit a response to your solicitation if they wish. Creating a level playing field for bidders ensures that price quotes and bids for products will be competitive, which is essential for purchasing quality goods at the lowest possible price. Fairness and integrity include being transparent throughout the procurement process and are critical to achieving full and open competition. Some examples of ways in which competition can be restricted include placing unreasonable requirements on vendors. For example, requiring that they only make deliveries between 9:30 and 10 a.m., having unnecessary bonding and experience requirements. For example, requiring that the vendor be in business for a minimum of 20 years may unnecessarily eliminate a vendor and therefore restrict competition. Pricing contracts requiring the food service program to purchase product. For example, if the high school principal enters into a contract with a beverage company and the benefit the school receives, such as a scoreboard, are based off sales from the food service program. When developing product specifications, requesting only a brand name product and not allowing an equivalent product to be bid on. Organizational conflicts of interest, such as purchasing supplies from a family member, and not providing sufficient time for vendors to respond and submit a bid. All of these are examples of ways that competition can be restricted and are practices that are not allowable. The last principle of procurement is to ensure the purchase or contract is awarded to a vendor who is both responsive and responsible. To be responsive means the vendor provided all the information that was requested in the solicitation and the products meet the specification you asked for. And to be considered responsible, the vendor is capable of performing under the terms and conditions of the contract. There are different types or methods of procurement, which can be broken down into informal and formal methods. Informal procurement includes micro purchase and small purchase. The formal methods include invitation for bid, request for proposal, and non-competitive, or sometimes called sole source. The method you use depends on the dollar amount of the purchase and what your needs are. An informal process can be used when the dollar value of the purchase is at or below the most restrictive threshold. The federal thresholds are used here on this slide, but your local threshold may be less. Micro purchase procedures may be followed for a purchase at or below $10,000. Small purchase procedures may be followed for purchases at or below $250,000. And any purchase over $250,000 must follow formal procedures. These thresholds are when you are required to use a certain procurement method. However, it is okay to be more restrictive, such as using a formal procedure when buying something less than $250,000, but you cannot be less restrictive. For example, using micro purchase procedures for a purchase greater than $10,000. If your district thresholds are more restrictive, you must adhere to your local threshold. Check with your business office to see if this is the case. Micro purchase procedures can be used when the amount of a single transaction is less than or equal to $10,000, or your local micro purchase threshold if more restrictive. Micro purchases are distributed equally among qualified suppliers as much as possible. You would not be purchasing from the same vendor every time. Instead, you would be shopping from a variety of vendors and distributing your purchases equitably. For example, this week you are buying local apples from Farmer A, next week from Farmer B, and the week after that from Farmer C. Keep in mind that this is not necessarily the most economical option. Prices must be reasonable, but you will most likely get better pricing by following another procurement method. The small purchase method, commonly called 3 bids and a buy, can be used when the value of the purchase is $250,000 or less, or whatever your local threshold is. With this method, you are obtaining multiple quotes, ideally 3, and then making the purchase from the lowest price offer that still meets your requirements. This is a competitive method of procurement, but is less rigorous than using a formal process, which we will talk about in a minute. When using the small purchase method to procure goods or services, you need to have clear written specifications. This allows you to make a fair and equal comparison of the same product from multiple vendors. For example, you don't just want to ask for an apple. You want to be clear and specify perhaps US number 1, 125 to 138 count, any variety apple. You may also want 5 cases delivered to each school, once a week, August through December. Now, with these clear specifications used on your solicitation document, you can contact Farmer A, B, and C along with any other potential vendors. Price quotes can be requested by phone, email, fax, or in person, and providing them with the specifications and solicitation document. Next, you will evaluate price quotes and award the contract to the lowest price vendor that is also both responsive and responsible. If a vendor responds with the lowest price, but they are not willing to deliver the apples as requested in the solicitation, they are not responsive and responsible, and you would not award the contract to this vendor. It is important that you manage the contract for compliance, meaning the vendor is doing what it is they agreed to do in the contract. Regardless of how you receive the quotes, they must be documented and support the procurement process. And make sure to maintain all documentation. Formal procurement procedures must be used when the value of the purchase is greater than $250,000 or your local threshold if more restrictive. The types of formal procurement are invitation for bid, or IFB, request for proposal, or RFP, and non-competitive, sometimes called sole source. It is important to understand the difference between an IFB and RFP so that vendors know what it is you are asking for. An IFB uses sealed bidding and results in a fixed price for the duration of the contract. It must be publicly advertised, and bids should be solicited from adequate number of suppliers, providing them with enough time to respond before you have a public opening of all bids. Also, the IFB should describe the specifications of the requested items and the minimum standards expected in measurable terms. The contract is awarded to the lowest price, responsive and responsible bidder. This IFB process is used when you want to award a contract based only on price. An RFP allows the vendor to respond with a proposal of how they will meet your requests. It results in a fixed price contract or a cost reimbursable contract. Cost reimbursable means you pay the vendor for their cost of the item plus a fixed fee. Cost plus a percent is not allowable. Just like IFBs, RFPs must be publicly advertised. However, there is no required public opening of the proposals. This is because other steps, such as evaluating the proposals, still need to take place before the contract can be awarded. The solicitation identifies the goods and services being requested, and all factors that will be used when evaluating responses must be clearly identified. Price alone is not the sole basis for award, the way it is for an IFB, but price is the primary consideration. You will use this RFP process when other factors in addition to price will be used to award the contract. The non-competitive procurement method can be used when competition is deemed inadequate and procurement under small purchase procedures, sealed bids, or competitive proposals is not feasible. There are two required policies and procedures that school nutrition programs are required to have. The first is a written code of conduct, and the second are procurement procedures. You may be able to find these with your other district policies. A code of conduct is a set of rules outlining the responsibilities of or proper practices for an individual or an organization. Federal regulations require school nutrition programs to have a written code of conduct to include these 3 elements at a minimum: prohibiting real or apparent conflicts of interest for employees engaged in selection, award, and administration of contracts, and employees are prohibited from soliciting gifts or incentives, and include disciplinary actions for violations. The procurement procedures describe how the school nutrition program conducts purchases and follows regulations. It should also include the thresholds for various purchase methods or reference the federal thresholds. If you need assistance with your procurement procedures and/or code of conduct, we do have a template available on our website that you may customize to reflect your program's actual practices. Procurement can feel daunting. Here are some things to keep in mind as you start assessing your compliance with program regulations. Think about your current practices. Do they comply with the 4 principles of procurement? Are you buying from a vendor just because you always have? Or are you following proper procedures and doing your due diligence to achieve competition? Do you know what your district's small purchase threshold is? Is it more restrictive than the federal thresholds? Are you documenting the process and maintaining records, such as invoices, solicitations, price comparisons, and formal contracts if you have any? And find your code of conduct and procurement procedure. Do they contain the required information? Do they make sense, or do they need a revision? As you start to familiarize yourself with the procurement regulations and your current practices, feel free to reach out to our office with any questions you may have. You can reach us at 624-6842 or 624-6843, or by email at child.nutrition@maine.gov. This concludes our training module on Procurement 101.